All right, hello everyone. Good day, and welcome. Today it's a great Sunday afternoon, and I've got a lot of awesome stuff to go over today. So let's just get going. So this week, for the past 3 days, since 3 days in a row since yesterday, we were discussing some three-part acts of a series where it just got better and better mostly until the third part. For instance, here we have Mario 3. The first two Mario games are both great games. I mean, the first game really opened up side-scrolling type games, especially for this platform. The second one also a really neat adventure, but it wasn't really till the third one it hit its stride. And you have a hammer suit, you have a Tanuki suit, you can turn into a statue, frog suit. There's just so much to this game, and the graphics were really great for an NES. And then you have the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and we discussed how each book just getting better and better, leading up until the culmination of the awesome friendship between Frodo and Sam. And I don't want to spoil too much, but it's a great story with so much stuff going on. But their friendship to me, it really hits home, especially in that third book. And then finally, we talked about The Legend of Zelda. The first two games, especially the first being a great opening type title to the NES system. It's an earlier game. But it had a lot in it. It did a lot for an NES game at the time, but the graphics really weren't that great, even comparatively, and of course, at nowadays standards. And the story wasn't really fleshed out super well. And then you got to 2, which is added some interesting elements, but still didn't really hit a stride, in my opinion, this series until the third part with Link to the Past, where you have the Dark World, you have this amazing story. You have a game that I like to play through just so I can get that amazing ending and hear this tale of the Master Sword once more. So those are 3 awesome 3-part things. And so today I want to give my 3-part act. So today I wanted to give something that's a third part. So I was thinking of giving you the Igniter 2 R3 release. But that just didn't seem good enough. So let's get right at it and bring you Igniter 3. And this is going to be the 3rd-part act in the Igniter series that I think will really be that final culmination, or the culmination of what I've built up so far, and to be the best release yet. So today with Igniter 3, I want to talk about the new hardware, because this is a new hardware. So we want to talk about that hardware. And then I want to go over the firmware changes I made on top of this hardware. Some are just improvements, some are utilizing the new hardware. And then after that, I want to talk about the default files and how that's affected by this new release. And then finally, some logistics for the release. So first, let's talk about the hardware, going into specifications, pad improvements, ground improvements, and then audio. All right, specifications. So Igniter 2 is actually already a pretty great board. So I wanted to take what was good from it and just improve upon it. So I took the same physical size as Igniter 2 for Igniter 3. So that's for those that don't know, that's the 2.07 inch long by 0.85 inch wide. And that's with the true drive. What's great about this means it's chassis compatible. So if anyone that made up a chassis for Igniter 2, it'll just work for Igniter 3. You don't have to get like a new chassis. And the true drive is also removable as it was before. So for anyone that's doing the battery and the board in a row, it's like if you have only a 1-inch ID, it's very small, you can snap that off and get your length down to like 1.8 inch or so. I forget the exact length. With the true drive snapped off, and then you can wire it anywhere you need to. It just allows some more flexibility. And so here we have a picture of Igniter 3. Again, you can see it's very similar in overall look and appearance to Igniter 2. It's the same basic design, but I've completely gone through and redone every ground in pads and such, and we'll get right into those right now, in fact, with the pad improvements. So the goal of this was I wanted to make soldering as easy as possible. So the first thing I did was I put every pad that's a main pad on the outside of the board. In fact, there's only 2 pads right now that are on the bottom inside of the board. And those pads are not really even used. One is just an extra ground in case you want it to ground out some extra thing. And then the other is a third switch pad if I ever decide to add some new app that needs a third switch or anything. But they're not even needed. So all the main pads are there on the outside. So the pad size is the same before for the large size. Those pads stay the same. Those were already pretty easy to use, so that's great. But what's awesome is those really small pads, I've increased those 50% bigger. So now they're halfway between the old small and big pads. So they're really not much smaller than the big pad. So they're actually a lot easier to deal with. And I also put the main power and ground in a row. Before there was a little L shape, and then that ground pad became a little hard to solder to. So I've just put them all in a row on this board. I think that makes it quite a bit easier. And then finally, anytime I had a pad and then there was a component near it, I either was able to move that component away, or if it was I oriented the component in such a way that the part that's near the pad will actually be a part that is, if you soldered over to it, it's just internally connected anyway, so it doesn't matter. So here you can see up top what we have is the picture of the Igniter 3. And then down at the bottom, this is the old Gen 2 board. I don't even know if this was Igniter or which one this is specifically, but basically it's my Gen 2 board. This is an older Gen 2 board, in fact, before I went to the Nicholas Gold. As you see, I have on Igniter 3 up top. But you can see it's pretty similar, but let's go over the differences, start pointing them out. Well, first here up top, you see I've circled in white. Those are the audio and mute pads. So, and you see on the bottom, I've circled in orange, those tiny little pads in the middle of the board that are like between other components you can't touch. So that's very difficult to solder on this bottom one. On the top, you can see it's right on the outside, and those are actually full-size pads now. So soldering up a MaxAmp to get a second audio, to get a second speaker, it's not a difficult install anymore. I've moved that to being an easy feature, not for advanced users. The next thing is you can see circled in white up top and then circled in orange on the bottom. These are the small pads. And you can see, look at the top on the white, it's hard to even notice a difference in the size of these pads. They look pretty much the same size. Whereas here on the bottom, you can very clearly see those small pads are very tiny. So I've made the small pads a lot easier. This is really great for Igniter 3 because then the 8 accent LEDs become much easier to add. And then the 2 string pads for anyone that's doing the wireless audio for like the Sabre Hornet and the Sabre Swarm system, that's easier as well. And then here's what I was mentioning about the pads being in a row. So on top, when it's circled in white, you can see the pads are all in a row, the main, power, and ground. And then on the bottom, you can see that L shape, and where the ground pad being nooked in an L between the other components, it's very hard to get to. So with that in mind, I have to say that that does make it easier. And also I wanted to call out here, this is a good example about the components. Because if you look down at the bottom on that orange, that little capacitor that's there, if you accidentally soldered the power that's in the corner to that part of the little capacitor, that would short it out completely. That's really bad. But here on the top, you can see I oriented the component between the 2 pads such that if you got solder over, it'll just touch it where it's internally connected anyways, so it won't matter. All right, with that, let's go on to the ground improvement. And honestly, I made many like power rail and ground improvements, many that are like on the inside layers of the boards that you guys can't even see. They'll just make the audio and the responsiveness that much better. I just really improved it. But the one that I wanted to go over, it's one that you can see and one that you directly affects NeoPixel installs and any other application where you're doing multiple LEDs in parallel. So the previous Igniter 2, while good, was really designed for like a single LED in mind. And so I wasn't really thinking of the pixel support at that time. So here's the original ground from Igniter 2. And note that this is the output picture from my design program. It was really hard to take a real picture and have it show up, so I just did this. But here I've got it circled. You can see I just have a small trace, and that's how the ground wire was that goes from the true drive back to your main ground, where the LED grounds through the board. It's pretty good, but it doesn't quite hold up with the full amperage of if you're going to do like a major NeoPixel install, especially if you want to do something like 2 NeoPixels for a double-ended blade or something. So now, here's the new improvement for IntelliBlade and to really make sure you can have the power. I don't even think I need to circle it, but I'm going to go ahead. And you can see it's not just a small trace anymore, it's like a giant area. So this can handle like amazing amounts of amperage. You don't have to worry about grounding out your boards through this. Okay, so audio. Now that we've talked about that ground improvement, let's talk about the reason that I actually made the support for this. This is the reason why I brought Igniter 3 to market, is to improve the audio. So let's talk a little bit about the previous audio, like in the previous boards. So I just want to mention that in Igniter 2 and below, it's not a full 16-bit audio. And I apologize if there was confusion, because I think very early on my website, the wording and such wasn't right. And there was even some confusion about how the library worked. So apologies for that. So what did we have? We actually have 16-bit processing on Igniter 2 and every other Igniter and every other board I sell. It's 16-bit processing, but at the very last second, right before it does the DAC to the wire, the counter in the system that I jam the 16-bit value into, they do some kind of truncation and eventually do the conversion based on 10-bit. They claim by stuffing the 16-bit in there, they're able to give you a better resolution with the 10-bit conversion. But at the end of the day, it's still only 10-bit. So now I want to talk a little bit about how digital audio works for you, those of you not familiar with it. Because us companies, sometimes we throw out these numbers. We got this bit, we got that bit, la la la. And some of you may not understand. But this is the normal warning I sometimes give, okay, like tech warning. So if you guys aren't into tech and don't like care about very technical details, just twiddle your thumbs, play your Rubik's Cube, play your what is it, that newfangled fidget device if you guys are more new school. Just for a second, and I'll tell you when the tech talk's over. Okay, so let's begin. Here we have basically an audio. I've taken just a very small section of audio here. We can say that this is an audio waveform, and the red line represents the true analog audio that we're trying to replicate. Now what I've done is, you can see I've got points across there, and that's how we would try to sample that digitally. So in digital audio, you just take points at a specified period, and that's what this length between these two lines, that would be the period in this example. In our application, this is actually 1 divided by 22,050, because that's the sampling rate we're using. So that's one thing that affects digital audio quality. I think most boards on the market are using 22050, maybe 44.1, which is like your standard CD quality. But either of those work fine for these type of saber sounds. However, there's another thing that affects quality, and it's this. It's not about the height per se, because using 10-bit versus 16-bit, for instance, you have the same height. But what happens is you can only represent that height and also in discrete chunks. So a 16-bit, you have like 32,000, almost 33,000 little nooks in the same amount of height, whereas with 10-bit, you only get, not even quite 2,000. So I want to represent what that looks like. So we can assume the orange is some representation that allows 10 increments, and the blue here is a representation that only allows 2 independent increments. And I just picked a small number so the example's clear. Of course, it's a lot better than this with 10 and 16. But what you can see is if you draw out this 10-bit, you see the wave that we represent by only having those 2 discrete levels to represent the signal. It becomes very blocky. And so when you play this back, it's not going to sound very good. Now again, 10-bit, it won't be this blocky, because 10 bits is enough resolution to get it more smooth than this. But the idea is the same, that with going to 16-bit from 10-bit, you do get more smoothness represented on the signal. So with that said, 16-bit is what I have on Igniter 3. I've added an off-board 16-bit DAC component onto Igniter 3. And what's cool about this is a component that sits between the MaxAmp and the CPU, and it handles the conversion from digital to analog. So like I said in Igniter 2, like all of my processing was in 16-bit. Only at the last second, when I jammed that value into the counter where the board itself does the conversion, it does the lossiness. So now what I do is just take that 16-bit value, dump it off to this external component, and then it does the conversion directly from the 16-bit, so no loss of quality happens. And what's great about this approach is that same volume and the same awesome performance of the MaxAmp, it's still there. It's just that now we've got a 16-bit converter sitting between it and the board. So now we have the full quality. So you get the most powerful amp for 3.7 volts on the market. You're going to get that, and you're going to get the true 16-bit audio. So you're getting it all with Igniter 3. And with that, let's go over this awesome demo. I mean, I'm really excited about this. I think you guys are really going to see the quality here. So let's just do it.
Episode 1.
Awesome, great. Like, I hope you love this audio as much as I love it. I really think, being at full sound, just being so crisp with all the motions, really ringing out all the sounds and being clear is really what Igniter needed, and now it's there. So with that, let's move on and start talking about some of the firmware improvements of Igniter 3. So the main firmware improvements I made were the troubleshooting LED, audio volume improvements, dual phase improvements, multi-phase improvements, and then finally I want to talk a little bit about clash. All right, so let's start with troubleshooting LEDs. So I would love to have this row of people here, like just sitting right here in my office, like answering all your calls. So if anyone that has a problem, these people would just like jump on it, help you immediately, get you solved. Because what I really want to do is get my customers up and running as fast as I can. I want to make things as painless as possible. Unfortunately, I can't afford that. Like, I can barely afford to like pay people to help me out. So yeah, I definitely can't do that, unfortunately. So what did I do? Instead, I brought the troubleshooting to you on the board. How did I do that? Well, I put a new little SMD LED right on board on Igniter 3. And then what happens is I have that in the programming that this LED blinks at certain amounts of times when there's fatal and non-fatal errors. And we'll talk about the difference in just a minute. So it's think of it like the old school, like the old OBD1 type errors in the cars where it would just blink your flash engine light different amounts. That's what we have here. So this specific number of time it blinks represents a specific failure. All right, so here's the Igniter 3 board again. And what I want to do is, you can see here circled in white, that's the little SMD LED. It's a little green LED, and that'll blink when there's an error. And now here I have the table of all the errors. And you can see I have the number of the blinks over on your guys' left, which is closest to me. And then farthest from me, it's what kind of error you can have. And now you may notice that some of those are in red and some are in black. Well, red means it's the fatal error, which means the instant the error happens, the board's just going to do nothing except for the error LED is going to blink. And your first accent probably will still be blinking. If it's black, actually in those cases, which are if you have a messed up effect sound or you're missing an effect or something, it's in the incorrect format, those will actually, the board will just continue to work. But what will happen is just, for instance, it's, say a swing is messed up. You'll do a swing, it just won't make a swing sound, but it will, continue to hum, and then you'll continue to do everything that you can. And what's neat about this is, like, this is really helpful because I think some people actually had problems with fonts like this in the past and then just chalked it up to the board being irresponsive and not picking up swings. But what's actually going on is they're missing from the font file. And now you can tell that because you'll see this LED blinking. You'll know, hey, something's wrong. It's not reading that file. With that, let's go over a quick demo here. And I'll basically, how the demo format will work is I'll show you a screen of what I did to mess up the SD card or the files or anything. And then I'll show you that when you put that card in, it blinks. So let's see that demo. great. Like I really think those area LEDs are really going to help you guys out and just make your experience that much easier and that much better to install the new Igniter 3. With that, let's go on to the audio volume. So some of you may have noticed, especially when using like a bass type speaker with Igniter 2, that if you turned it on the default volumes, like the 15 and 16 that I ship with, it'll be super loud, and you'll get like what this poor lady is like, oh, it's so loud. But then the problem is you turn it down one notch, and then yeah, it becomes clear again. It's not overpowering, but then it's super quiet. So there's no happy medium. And this is just an artifact of the way the audio had to be in Igniter 2, where the audio was actually based on a division. However, now in the audio for Igniter 3, I still have the values of 0 to 16 for the hum and the effects, but each increment isn't a division anymore. It's actually an increment of 1/16. So you can just consider this as a percent. Instead of the base being 100, the base is 16. What does that mean? Well, to explain that in terms of how you go from Igniter 2 to Igniter 3, before when you had a value of 15, that's now a new value of 8. And before when you had an old value of 14, that's now 4. So that means now you can just drop from 8 to 7 to give it that little bit of extra headroom. But you can see that's going to barely decrease the volume because 4 was the old decrement to 14. So now you have much more expressive range to tune in for your speakers to get them as loud as you can without having any kind of artifacts and such. And another thing to say is 0 is completely off. So if you want to just turn your hums all the way off and have some sound effects where just the motions make sound, etc., or you can do vice versa. You can have only the hum going. I think it'd be weird, but hey, you can do it. So that's a new feature of Igniter 3. And finally, again, it's perfect for bass speakers because the bass speakers, they really can't be powered at full power because the amp is so powerful, they'll get overpowered. But now you can turn it down just enough and still get the volume out of it with the clarity of Igniter 3 16-bit without having to be too quiet. And there's no demo because you already saw the demo. When I did that audio video, the audio demo I showed before, the Railmaster, I had it set to 7 and 15, and the bass was using 6 and 14. And you can see the bass sounded like clear and loud and awesome. Whereas if on Igniter 2, if I turned it to 14, the bass would have sounded great, but just not been quite loud enough, honestly. So with that, let's move on and let's go to talk about the dual phase hums. This is a new feature that's going to enhance the already awesome dual phase from Igniter Mini, Igniter 2, etc. And so what is this? Well, now you can add a dhum 01, dhum 02, all the way up to dhum 99 in your hums folder for every font that you want. And when you do that, when you do the dual phase motion and twist the hilt, it'll actually switch to one of those dhums. So that way you'll get a hum shift as well as the color shift. And then the dhum will be chosen linearly if you have linear hum set. Otherwise, it'll just be random, which is the default. And then how dual phase works is you do a twist, either direction, doesn't matter, goes to dual phase. And then you do a twist, either direction, and it goes back. So when you go back, then it will re-choose a hum. So every alternating time, you'll go to like a dual hum, then a normal hum, dual hum, normal hum. And that gives you, that way the hum matches the color. So like if you set the two colors, your dual phase color will always use a dual hum. So you can tune the hums and the colors together to really have a rich experience with dual phase. With that, let's see how awesome it is in action. Let's see the new dual phase hums.
Essence.
All right, those dual phase hums, I really enjoy them. I think they're it enhances the dual phase experience, and you guys are really going to enjoy playing with these. So now, on the same vein of dual phase, I actually made a complete enhancement to the multi-phase feature, which was one of the best features in terms of technology and implementation from the Igniter 2 and previous when I implemented it, I think back in R5, but just was lacking in terms of usability. So let's go over what the legacy was so we can explain the improvements, because I believe a lot of you weren't using this feature, including myself, honestly. So in the old way, what would happen is when you hold the aux button and twist, that engages the multi-phase. And with multi-phase, if you twist forward, it goes to the next font. If you twist backwards, it goes to the previous font. So that entire font would switch, including all the colors, all the like clash of sounds, the blade effects would change, like everything would change as you switch it. You did have the option to choose if you can switch or keep the hum. But the problem with this is if you keep the hum, you literally just completely switch the font, which is the same as if you would have done it from the menu. So you didn't gain anything new there. And if you choose to keep the hum, that's really cool because you can use every hum with every other sound effects package, which really isn't possible on any other board. But then you lose that awesome like sound of the hum changing. So it's like both had a problem, unfortunately. And then the other problem with this whole feature is because you're loading in the entire new effect, and either if you choose to keep or switch the hum, you always have to wait for all the values to load in because like once you did the switch, those values have to come in from disk. So there's a wait there. And then again, as I mentioned, you're only going to get the new font or no new hum. So either choice really isn't great. So now, what are the enhancements? Well, now I've decided when you switch, it's basically colors and hums are what go together. So main blade colors and the hum and the dual hums, those all go together. So only those switch now. So the hum will always swap. When you multi-phase, you're always going to get the new hum from the sound that you're going into, be it the previous or the next one, depending on which way you do it. And then what's great about this is there's no load after the switch because you just keep the same effects, the same swings and everything from the previous one, including the blade effects and everything. And what's great is you still get that awesome ability. You can use every effect with every other font bank. So as you're multi-phasing through, you get to use all the effects from the font you started with the next hums and the next ones. So with that, let's see a demo of this where I start with the first font and go through many fonts, and you'll see that the first font's effects and colors are retained as I go through. But any font you start with would do this. I just start with the first. So let's see that demo.
Standard issue. Hidden warrior.
That's really great. I think that improvement is awesome. So let's just keep going and talk about it's probably the second most important feature, I'd actually say. The audio was the first, but this is the second. This is the feature that I think many of you had desired more from an Igniter 2. And here at Nigon's Electronic Creations, I personally take feedback very seriously. And I heard you guys loud and clear on this, and now I'm bringing you what I think is what you guys have needed this whole time. So in Igniter 2, swinging and hitting something and having it make a sound was pretty good. I think there's always room for improvement in some areas, but I think that overall that motion was detected pretty well. But the problem was, and I think that it was just a problem with Igniter 2, the sensing, is that it didn't pick up the reverse, which is where we have in this case, where you have someone that's attacking, and the guy farthest from me on your right is just standing back. He's not moving his hilt, he's just parrying. But the other guy whacks his sword, and his sword should go off. And quite frankly, in Igniter 2 and before, the sensor and the firmware didn't do a good job of picking up that scenario. In most cases, it was missed, unfortunately. So now in Igniter 2, I've improved it. It now detects both parries and clashes very well. And what's also better is I've made a very huge range of adjustment so that you can choose how hard you want it to be to detect the clash impact. So if you want it to be like, you can just like, stop short and do it, you can do it. If you want it to be, you've got to really whack something, you can do it. You're going to get less false positives now, especially while doing spinnings. So you're not going to have the clash going off if you start swinging it really hard and spinning around. I worked really hard on the firmware to get that perfect now with this Igniter 3 sensor. That's great. So with that, let's see the demo. I mean, I can talk about this for all day, but the demo is going to really show how it works amazingly. So let's just see that. Motion editor. Press and hold the aux button. Clash. 150. 255. 0. I hope you guys are as impressed as I am with this demo. I love this new clashes on Igniter 3. It brings the clashes up to the level of the awesome swings I've had since Igniter 2. And so now they're both up there to the best that you can have. Now let's continue on and talk about the default files. So the default files have been remastered. And this is because there's a song I really like by Jim Steinman called Bad for Good. It's a pretty cool song. You guys can look it up if you're interested in like old rock music. But I think this is the reverse. This is like good for bad is what happened in Igniter 3. Because when I improved the audio amp, the clarity was so good. Fonts that sounded fine on Igniter 2 started sounding bad on Igniter 3 because all the little problems started to come out and you could hear them. So because of this, I went through and remastered the entire default package to make it perfect for Igniter 3. So I adjusted almost every single hum. I went through and did the EQ. I think there was only one or two I didn't change. Every hum I went through though and changed the EQ to make it match the new Igniter 3. Dark Apprentice specifically had some problems. Let's put it that way. I made that for you, those of you that remember the history, way back on the FX forums. Way back when I had that breadboard and I was doing that thread in that like new technology section. It's still there, I think. You can go look at it. It's fun. That's when I had actually made Dark Apprentice for that old board and the old speaker I was using. So yes, it definitely needed some improvement. I finally did it. I completely redid the swings. They're brand new swings. And then the rest of the files I went through and did some tweaks and EQs too. I also fixed some of the looping. It turned out some of the hums didn't like loop properly. They weren't like lined up correctly, and it wasn't really noticeable in Igniter 2, but now you hear those little clicks and stuff with how clear this amp is. So I went and fixed those. And then there were some other effects that I just wanted to sound deeper. So I loaded up Reaper, which is a really good audio mixing program. I highly recommend it compared to, say, Audacity, which a lot of you use. So I loaded that up and loaded some of my effects, like a little bit of reverb, the compressor, and the exciter, and I used some of those to just bring out some more oomph and power from the sounds. And then, of course, I tested this all with the new 16-bit DAC with the two speakers, making sure they sounded great. And I'm much more happy now with the default files. And finally, let's go on to some logistics for the release. 3 things I think all of you really want to hear about, specifically the second one, of course, and maybe the third one as well. But let's talk about the upgrades, pricing, and availability. Well, upgrades. This is a new firmware, so you can't like magically upgrade old. This is new hardware, not firmware. You can't just upgrade hardware, right? There's no way for me to magically zap your board and the hardware changed, right? So there's no upgrade. However, and this is brand new. In fact, nobody knows about this, not even my certified installers or anything. But I, as well, created an i2 R3 release. So I wasn't lying at first when I said I had an R3 release to i2. I do actually have that. And what does that contain? It only contains 2 things. It contains the updated NeoPixel wiring, so you can wire through the MOSFETs to save some power. And it also includes the improvement for the LED driver audio. So if you're using an old style LED, you get that audio improvement, just like the SC2R3. And this is just sort of a thank you for everyone that supported me with the Igniter 2. That way you still at least are going to get some upgrade for free, even though you're not going to get Igniter 3. Now, so anyone that watched my last release, I put some money bag here. I think everyone knows what's about to happen. But here at Nigons Electronic Creations, I'm all about cutting costs for the customer. I want to make the experience as best as possible, but I want it as accessible as possible for everyone. Because for me, a lot of the joy is seeing the joy that you guys experience when you get to install the board. I get to sort of live vicariously through you guys. That's my plan. I can't go out and stuff as much as I like, so I let all you guys do it, and then I feel like I'm a part of it all. I love that. And so thank you for everyone that shares pics with me and shares your stories, and I love to experience your joy with you. With that said, I'm always looking ways to cut costs to make it easier for everyone to get my products. So when this Igniter 3 goes on sale on my site, it's going to be $130, and that's the normal price all the time. This isn't a sale. It's going to be $130. So you guys are getting this new 16-bit audio, the loudest sound you can possibly have with 3.7 volts, all for $130. And availability. Well, I have the boards, but they're going to be available within 2 weeks. And why? And this always happens for all my releases. And the reason is I spend all my time getting the release ready, making sure the quality is up to par, and then getting these videos ready. And then there's still some stuff I have to complete that I haven't really hired anyone to do, which is complete the manual, update my website with the new product, make sure all the files are up there and uploaded for everyone. All that stuff takes time. So just expect, I'll say 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks, it'll be up on my site for sale. In the meantime, go enjoy a new movie, which is going to be awesome. And then when you come back from that, these will be ready. All right, with that, today we had introduced Igniter 3 to the world. We all experienced the awesome hardware improvements of Igniter 3. Went over some specifications, how it shares the same size as Igniter 2, but has been completely revamped. how the pads have been improved. It's easier to wire to. We talked about the ground improvement, so it's really powerful. You don't have to worry about putting a ton of grounds through those MOSFETs, through that main ground plane. The audio, 16-bit audio with the MaxAmp, the best of both worlds, and still on 3.7. You get the loudest, best sound you possibly can have. You're not going to get better than this without going to some crazy huge setup that has like no runtime. And then we went into firmware right from the hardware. We talked about the troubleshooting LED, the little ants that can help you right from your house, so you don't have to worry about troubleshooting. You can figure out what's going on your own. The audio volume, how I've tuned it so you can just get the loudest volume possible that's still clear for whatever speaker you're using. Dual phase has been improved. You can now have the dual hum, so when you switch back and forth, you get a hum shift to go with your color shift. It just adds more to that experience. You're going to get the improvement in multi-phase. This is a great improvement as well, because now you get the best of both worlds. You get the ability to switch on the fly and get that hum switch and shift of colors and such, but you get to use every hum with every other effect package. So it's a really best of both worlds and without waiting. And finally, of course, the improvement of the clash here, which is awesome. Now the clash and the swings are the best that you can get in the Galaxy on Igniter 3. Then we talked about the default files. I completely revamped them. It's good for bad, because it's so good it was bad. The files weren't up to par with the awesome amp, and now I fixed it. And then we talked about the logistics, how I even made a small upgrade for people using Igniter 2, just as a thank you for supporting me. I talked about the new pricing, $130. And then I talked about the availability, how the boards will be available within the next 2 weeks. And that is it for Igniter 3. Thank you, everyone that shared this experience with me. Thank you for supporting me through this whole time. I hope you guys will now see that just like Frodo and Sam's journey, just like Mario 3, where you finally get those awesome suits in the third game, and just like Zelda with the Dark World and having that amazing ending with the story of the Master Sword. I hope you all see that this is in that same vein, that Igniter 1 and 2 that came before this, including the mini in there, they set up a great platform and were awesome, but this 3 just culminates and is the best. I'm thank you for coming here and sharing this story with me. Thank you for being a part of this journey. I look forward to talking to you guys all on the forums. And with that, God bless, and I will talk to you on forums.